Well, Mike, we're going to talk today about good work. And there was a lot in this book that made me think about you. So I thought that was interesting. Like, there were a couple different times that I'm reading this book and I'm thinking, man, Mike kind of did that. Hey, Mike kind of did that. Hey,
Yeah.
Mike kind of did that, right? Like, and I was like, wow, this is a really interesting book. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and get rolling with follow up. Mike, you had some follow up that was start logging your stories. Have you done that?
It's half done, I'll say, because I have created the quick add macro that I was going to use to add these things, and I have adjusted the daily notes template. However, I have not captured a story to the daily notes template yet. To be
Okay.
honest, I was a little bit behind on this preparing for this episode, so I didn't finish the book until last night, and the action items kind of slipped my mind until just a couple of days ago. So I just adjusted the daily notes template and added the quick add macro today. So I do think this is going to work, but I don't think I'm going to get a bunch of stories from this, and that's okay. I'm just hoping to have a couple of stories every once in a while. And the quick add macro basically pops up and it says, tell me a story, dot, dot, dot. And then there's a text field, and then you just write down some text, hit enter, and then it appends a hashtag story tag to that entry in the daily note so that I can click on that tag and I can see all of the stories that I've captured there. And again, these are the seeds of the stories, they're not the stories themselves. And then the intention is that I will bring those over into the story file and develop them further from there.
Remind me again, Mike. Like, what if you were doing this and you're gonna then take them and evolve them into actual stories? Why? Like, what's your goal with capturing the stories and moving the stories forward again?
Well, I think capturing the stories is just recognizing what's going on that might be good content for a story. And then developing those stories. I mentioned, I think last time, how I was doing coaching for a little bit with Aaron Beverly, and he was encouraging me to build this story file because basically you never know when you're going to need these stories. So I think there's value just in the act of creating the stories and sort of processing some of the more significant moments of your life and codifying it down into short snippets that you can use to explain it to somebody else, kind of cements it in your brain as well. So even if I never tell these stories, having a bank of them, I think is going to be valuable. And I want to do that more regularly. Hopefully, the story section in the daily note, being able to capture those quickly, will sort of spur that.
Gotcha. All right. So my follow up items were log stories from the family to a story file. That was number one, and then number two was brainstorm around a creative project that I have that's around storytelling. I didn't do any either of these specifically, but what I did was I refined like the why I would want to do these, which is why I asked you the question that I just asked you. Because I was thinking about doing these, and I was like, what's my goal? Like, what am I trying to accomplish with these? And that was actually the big value of me having these follow up items from last time we recorded to this time. The log the key stories of my family to the story file. It's really so 20, 30 years down the road, I can look at the story file and go, I remember when, and like have the details written down there. So this was like a historic document that I could use later on in life, and that maybe somebody would find later on down in life and be like, oh wow, that's really interesting. That's really cool. So like that was fun to think about. Like, oh, I don't really want to tell these stories to anybody. Like I don't care to like, create any kind of, media with this. I just really want to capture these for the historical archive of the Hickson family, kind of a thing. The creative project around specific storytelling, I think this one comes from the fact that like I really just like to hear people's really interesting stories, and the project would be to have other people tell their stories for my own personal edification, and then maybe there's somebody in the world that would like want to hear those as well. But that was like a fun thing for me to do. I didn't move on like actually setting up a system to capture them. For the family one, I think big part of the reason why that one is because I want my wife and I to do this together, because we often will remember things very differently, and like the banter around us trying to solidify the details of the story would be like a crazy fun time. So I think like that's like I think that's like a side project for my wife and I to do that would be really like enjoyable of like, let's think back however long we can think back and like, let's remember those stories. And then the creative project around specific storytelling, I think it would be a fun one. Would it turn into anything? I don't know. And that like ties into like good work. Like, is that something I would put into that good work bucket of like, it's worth the time of me doing for, good work, feel good purposes. So, all right, cool. So that was good. Recapping our follow-up items, let's move into the book. As we've mentioned, we are reading Paul Millard's Good Work text. And this is a second book. This is the second book of Paul Millard's. The Pathless Path was the first one, which you've read. Give us a 2-second takeaway from that. Was it worth reading? Would you read it again? What do you think, Mike?
It's worth reading. Not sure if I would read it again. The 2-second action item from it essentially is quit your job.
Okay. All right. So maybe similar, maybe not. All right. So the full title of this one is Good Work, Reclaiming Your Inner Ambition. Like I said, it's Paul's second book, and it's made up into 13 chapters. So you have an introduction, you have 13 chapters, and then there's a call to action at the end where he kind of recaps everything. And really, Mike, is it too far to say that this is a memoir? Like, this is like him kind of telling his story about like how he made this switch and how he made this gigantic transition from the consulting world into his good work and him doing good work. And then it transitions out of the, what I would consider like the memoir type book, into this, like, have you ever thought about these things and how would you do these things in your life? Like, is that doing it justice?
Yeah, for the most part, I think it's very reminiscent of The Pathless Path. The Pathless Path, the first part, if I'm remembering correctly, was really just his story. And the second part was sort of about embracing your pathless path. And really that was just a book that was intended to get people to think about pushing back against the status quo and trying to figure out different ways to do things, which has very much been part of our family fabric for a long time. We have in one of our core values, determined to be different, don't settle for average. So that was interesting to me. I think the difference here is that in good work, it's more focused on once you are on the pathless path, what are the types of things that you are doing there? But it very much is like the Pathless Path 2.0. These are two books that are meant to be read together. I don't know that you need to read the Pathless Path before you read this. I'm kind of interested to see where this discussion goes because you have read this one and not the Pathless Path. That's kind of the ideal scenario, I think, for me in this situation. But because you can do good work, I think, without just blowing everything up and moving to a crazy country like we talked about in the pro show. Well, mine wasn't moved to a crazy country. Actually, yours wasn't really either. But
mine wasn't either.
We did talk about what we would do if we could press the imaginary reset button. So if you're interested in that, you can join the pro show at patreon.com/bookwormfm, $7 a month. But this book is, I think, really important. And I feel like anybody, even if you've got a normal 9-to-5, this will probably get you thinking about the work that you are choosing to do differently. And I don't think you need to blow everything up in order for this book to have a positive impact. Sometimes, I've seen this with the life theme stuff that my wife and I teach. People go into it thinking, oh, this is going to be scary. It's going to cause me to just completely destroy everything and put it all back together. And a lot of times what people realize is, you know what? I'm actually really happy with what I'm doing. It's just now they've got clarity and motivation to lean into the things that are important and cut the things that aren't.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up what you did about the Pathless Path, because I actually felt a little bit like I was missing out because I hadn't read the Pathless Path. Like he does lean on that, and he mentions it a couple different times where he's like referring to something back in the Pathless Path, but he doesn't go back and describe it. And I was kind of like, oh, I wonder, I want him to unpack that more. Like, I wonder what that's all about. And I would like to kind of have more information or have more knowledge in that area. That doesn't mean I didn't get a lot out of this. It just meant like he refers back to it quite a bit. You know, he really does refer back to it quite a bit. The second thing that I'm glad you brought up was I don't think this book is only good if you're thinking about quitting your 9 to 5 and figuring out what that thing is. So your point is very, very well made in terms of I don't have any plans to quit my 9 to 5, and I still got a lot out of this, out of this book in terms of like evaluating things and thinking critically about what I'm doing and whether that fits into the quote unquote good work bucket. So that transitions us into kind of the intro section and maybe a little bit into part 1. I found it odd that he did not define good work early on in this book. I don't exactly remember, like, as we get through it, like, but we're a good ways into it before he actually tells you the definition of good work. And I didn't actually capture where it is. So did you capture where he actually first defines good work?
I did. Looking through my notes here. Actually, I can just search for this.
Is it where he does good work, good enough work? Is that the first place he does it?
Yes. So in the introduction, he does have a couple of anecdotes about good work, but the definitions, there's good work, there's good enough work, and then there is bad work.
Mm-hmm.
I've got those definitions in here somewhere, but they're kind of sprinkled throughout. Oh, good work right here. Activities that give me energy and fuel my journey.
Okay.
That was actually from chapter 8.
Chapter 8. Okay. Because I knew it was far into the book, but I couldn't remember. He does talk about good enough work in chapter 2, but then he doesn't really define everything until like way later in the book. And I was surprised by that. I was like, my goodness, like that's a really long time to go before you actually tell me what you mean by good work. So activities that give energy and fuel my journey, just to round that out, because we'll hit this again in chapter 8. Good enough work are tasks that I enjoy to some degree, help pay the bills, but are not my core good work. And then he's got supporting activities that are complementary, and then bad work is what you try to avoid.
Yep.
I thought that was really, really interesting. Okay, so part 1 is like, we're kind of setting up the stage, but part 1 is awakening to good work. And he's basically getting you to think about this idea of good work, but he doesn't define it until way later. He does talk about it in terms of, it's hard to define, makes it difficult to explain. He is kind of interweaving this, like I said, with the memoir of like him basically taking off, quitting his consulting job and moving to Taiwan. And like, he's mixing these two things together. So chapter 1, he gets into embrace the unknown, right? And he's thinking about, okay, what if I just stop thinking about money? What if I stop thinking about doing work for money? So here is what I'll call a bias in his book. And I'm not going to say it's a good bias or a bad bias, but it's definitely a bias in it. Is he directly addresses and he directly attacks this idea of, all right, most people work for money. They work for that paycheck. They work for the status that goes along with their title and that paycheck and those type of things. So he gets in here. What if I literally do anything else other than money? Some people will think that's reckless. What do you think about that, Mike? Like I would agree that this is the way I was taught to think about this is like, oh, why do I work? I work because I need to provide for my family. I work because I need income. What's my goal? My goal is to get the best job I can, doing the thing I'm interested in, but it also will pay me the most money. That way I can do all the things, buy a house, raise a family, eat, buy cars, yada, yada, yada. Like that was 100% the way I was brought up and the way I was raised. How about you?
I was raised the same way, even though my dad is an entrepreneur and started his own business. I think it's just kind of inherent for parents to want the best for their kids, but sometimes that means don't do the risky thing because it might not work. So I don't think it was ever articulated explicitly, but that's definitely the vibe that I picked up. And as the oldest in our family, I've got 2 younger brothers. There have been times when, as the oldest, my dad would come to me and be like, hey, talk some sense into your younger brother. He's thinking of doing this thing. So that's definitely what I picked up on. I think so this is going to be a very different conversation than if we would have covered this book even a month or 6 weeks ago. Okay. Because having gone through the Life HQ launch now, I feel like I'm on the other side and I can see the promised land that he is talking about here.
Okay.
And I feel like if I had read this before getting there, I would have been like, well, that worked for you, but I don't know if it's going to work for me, because Pathless Path got me to quit my job a year and a half ago. And it's been a struggle for a long time. And if you would have told me or asked me 4 to 6 weeks ago, are you going to make it? I'd be like, I don't know. I sure hope so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I have a different perspective now, having gone through the launch, because the launch went great. That I look back at what he is saying in this book now as I read it, and I'm like, I see what you're really saying. You're not just trying to, I don't know, if it adds more validity to the arguments that he's making, I feel, because I can see what that looks like for me. I don't think you can really see what that looks like prior to, however. So I think until you do just leap out into the unknown at some point, there's always going to be a little bit of, well, you're a crazy guy. You live in Taiwan. I'm not listening to you.
Okay, so this is good. Like, I mean, it's almost like we scripted this before, but I promise you, we did not talk about this at all before. I'm reading this book, and I can't tell you the number of times I went, yeah, but, you know, like I'm reading this thing and he'll make this statement. And I'm like, yeah, but, and then like, and it just happened so many times. So to hear you say that, having gone through this similar process, you know, released a product, you know, being on the other side of that thing, and like, that's a really good feeling for me. Like, it's a really good thing to say, like, okay, I've got at least 2 data points now to where this is possible, and this is not some far-fetched idea that some random guy just wrote and self-published. You know what I mean? Like, like that, because that was my bias going into this book. I was like, you're just some random guy that's self-published in this book. Why should I listen to you? Like, why should I listen to you at all? So that's really, really good feedback.
So the thing is, you're right. It is a self-published book, and there is a little bit of that. Well, you're a special snowflake and it worked out for you, but it's not going to work out for the majority of people who follow your advice. I don't think that's necessarily true, but you have to be able to see yourself in that story, in the story that he's telling, in order for it to work. So I don't think it's just follow these steps and absolutely everybody is going to make it. You have to have a belief that you can make it. But I also think you won't really know what the next steps are until you are out there. So when I was reading The Pathless Path, and that was one of the things that gave me the guts to walk away from the day job at the digital marketing agency and try to do this thing that I had wanted to do on my own for a while. I didn't really know what that looked like. And I kind of stumbled around for about 6 months trying a bunch of different things. And I finally kind of landed on the practical PKM stuff and started making YouTube videos on Obsidian. And that's really when things started to click for me. But even then, like, I was making stuff, but I didn't know what the signature product was going to be. Life HQ wasn't a thing in the back of my mind until maybe 3-4 months ago, when I really started going hard on, okay, now I have clarity. This is the thing that I want to make. And even until the launch, like, I didn't really know that it was going to work. So the thing that got me going down this path, though, was not, I stumbled onto The Pathless Path by Paul Millerd and I'm like, oh, this looks like an interesting book. It was, I had seen other people who I respected their opinions talk about how this was a life-changing book. Specifically, I remember an Ali Abdaal YouTube video where he was talking about some of the key concepts from it. And Ali Abdaal is somebody that I look up to. I mean, he had a good job, right? He was a doctor, and he walked away from that to become a YouTuber. And some people think that's crazy. And I don't think it was actually as risky as maybe it sounds, because he had amassed a bunch of success on YouTube prior to making that leap. That was a pretty easy transition, I think, in terms of, am I going to be able to pay my bills? Now, he talks in his book about how there was a lot of other stuff, family stuff, you know, the prestige that comes with, oh, there's a doctor in the family. His parents thought he was crazy, that kind of stuff that goes along with that. But I don't know, there has to be somebody in your circle, I think, who's sort of pushing you that way in order for you to really feel, yeah, I can do this. Otherwise, you know, anybody can write whatever the heck they want, throw it out on the internet. Who's this guy?
Exactly. All right. So I don't have very much on chapter 1. You know, chapter 1 was fine, but I didn't capture very much on it. The other thing I captured here was that he says, you know, experience in the 14 years on the default path of success. I would consider myself on the default path of success, right? Like if you look at the way my life has gone, maybe my one nuance would be that I went back to get a doctorate, which not everybody goes back to get a doctorate, but because my default path of success was teaching at the university, essentially I had to do that, or it was a much easier path if I went back and got that doctorate, right? Compared to trying to get into the university without having a doctorate. So for me, like in my world, that's the default path of success. I'm okay with that. Like I actually don't have a problem with the fact that I've spent a bunch of years on the default path of success, and I feel pretty good about that. Thinking back to when you were, before you broke free and went independent. I say broke free like it was a bad thing, but you know what I mean. Did you consider yourself on the default path of success?
Kinda. I think I sort of broke away a little bit from the default path when I said I don't want to take over the family business anymore, and I started writing online.
Okay.
But then I sort of went back into playing it safe mode where I was making stuff for other people who had large audiences because they'll pay me to make stuff and I like making stuff. So this is safe.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the digital marketing agency job, that was trying something different that I thought maybe I could be good at, but I wasn't really sure it was going to work. However, what I was promised in terms of compensation would have been very comfortable. Never quite got there, but ultimately I decided that this really isn't the thing for me anyways. And then it was like, okay, I'm telling my kids they can do anything. I really need to model this for them. And just got to the point where I have to make the leap. If I don't do this, I know it's going to be something that I will look back on at the end of my life and regret never having tried. And then floundered for quite a while, honestly. And just now, last couple of weeks with Life HQ, feel like I have a sustainable path again. And maybe that'll change again in the future. Maybe there'll be a default path that I can fall into with Life HQ, and I have to constantly be looking for the alternative path. But I think I've stepped off the default path a couple of times throughout my working life, but also there are ways where I sort of naturally gravitate towards that default path because I've got a family of 5 kids at home. I've got to provide for them, all that kind of stuff, which makes it hard.
Yeah. Okay, let's move into chapter 2. This is where I probably had the most restraint with the book. So chapter 2 is called Follow Your Energy. And do you know Mike Rowe? If I say the name Mike Rowe,
yes,
the dirty jobs guy. So he does a talk where he goes into this whole big spiel on follow your passion and how he thinks.
I know this. I reference this often. Yeah.
Yeah, how he thinks follow your passion is like the worst advice ever, and he has this connection or this reference to basically the porta potty people or like the sewage guys, where it's like, do you think they're following their passion? No, they're not following their passion. They're finding a job that people need done that they get paid really, really well for, and that's how they're doing it. And I got the same vibe, or I got the same feel for this while I was reading Follow Your Energy, because I was like, oh, okay, follow your energy. Now, he talks a couple different places in here. So one of the quotes he'll make is coming alive over getting ahead, right? So it's like, I want to do good work is work that brings you alive, brings you joy. You feel energized from doing it. That's where the energy piece ties into it. He'd also talk about, good enough work doesn't drain your energy and enables you to do things that actually move you forward. That he talks about this never-ending competition, that when you're on this normal path or the default path, you find yourself in a situation where you're competing with everybody else to do similar stuff, and that when you find something that's uniquely yours or that taps into your unique energy, you don't have any competitors. Okay, I get it. I understand what he's doing. It took me a while though before I understood this follow your passion idea is not this willy-nilly thing. It's actually more tangible than that, because it's following the thing that you don't feel like you have to work to do it. Right. So, okay, you wake up in the morning and you start doing this thing, and next thing you know, it's 4 hours later, but you don't feel drained. You don't feel like, oh my gosh, I just had to do that. So for instance, for me, the one that paperwork drains the life out of me. Right. So it's any kind of work that I have to do where I feel like I'm just filling out useless paperwork drains the life out of me. But like prepping for a class doesn't do that to me, right? Like if I'm prepping to teach a subject or to learn something in order to communicate it well, doesn't do that to me. So I understood what he was getting at here, that this idea of we're trying to look for those things that give us energy, don't suck the energy from us. And we want to do more of those things. What do you think of chapter 2?
I agree. Let me back up a little bit with the micro passion thing. I think we talked about this not too long ago, but one of the things that I got out of that video was don't follow your passion, but always bring it with you. So I think passion is maybe different than, and you didn't exactly say this, but this is kind of the vibe of like follow your passion. It doesn't just mean do what you love. The root word for passion is the Latin word pati, literally means to suffer. So what is worth going through some stuff in order to see it come about? And I think Paul Millard would agree totally with that definition. As you get further through the book, you realize that he's leaving money on the table. That's the price he's willing to pay for the lifestyle that he wants to embrace right now. So that's important context with just the title of Follow Your Energy. But I think that it's impossible to always do the things that are fun, the things that you really enjoy doing, the good work. There's going to be some good enough work that always comes with it. However, I can tell you, having gone through it, it's totally different when it's your good enough work versus somebody else's good enough work.
Okay.
And I don't really know how else to elaborate on that. I've heard people say, I'm not at this point yet, where the day that you pay off your mortgage, the grass feels different beneath your toes. It's your grass now. I think Dave Ramsey is the one who talks about that. I don't really know what that looks like, but that's sort of the same approach here. I think it just feels different when you are in control. Now, being in control, this is kind of interesting. Hadn't really planned on going this way, but control is one of the 3 aspects of motivation, going back to Master Your Motivation by Susan Fowler. And we actually talk a little bit about that in the life theme stuff. The thing about control is that you don't necessarily need to have 4 other options available to you. You just have to believe that you have the ability to change your situation if you wanted to. So I have the ability to walk away from the day job if I decide this isn't the thing for me.
Yeah.
That totally changes the relationship with the day job sometimes. So I think that the seed of the idea here of look for the things that make you come alive, that is good. I don't think packaged as just follow your energy. And that's not exactly what he's saying. That's the title of the chapter. That isn't really all that great. I really liked the quote on page 46 where he says, people think that the moment you quit your job, your new path begins. But for me, it wasn't immediate. That resonated with me. As I mentioned, I kind of tried a bunch of different things and didn't really land on the thing for quite a while. So that was, I guess, validation that I'm not abnormal with that. And then the other thing, I didn't have the guts to turn the gig down, referring to a $7,500 consulting project he didn't want to take. I know what that feels like too, where there are some projects where you're just, I know this is going to be a pain, but I really need the money, so I'm going to do it. My version of that for the last, 6 months has been trying to balance doing the freelance stuff where I can get paid per article or I get paid per video versus building the Life HQ stuff that I didn't know people were going to buy. I had no idea. I thought it was cool, but I didn't know if anyone was going to be interested in it once I put it out into the world. But there was this constant tension between do stuff that I can get paid for and build the thing for the future. So it's kind of like now versus the future. And if you're following the energy, then you just continually build for the future. But I don't think it's that simple either. You got to kind of find that balance.
Yeah. Okay. So another big point he starts to get into in this section is basically the way other people view the work that we do. And he references it all through the book, but basically it's like what's success in other people's eyes, and whether it's your parents or your spouse or your friends or whatever it might be, and the fact that at times they're going to look at you like you're crazy, and you have to be able to be okay with being okay with them saying those things, or being okay with them thinking that you're unsuccessful, and kind of powering through that. I thought that this was an interesting thing because maybe it's just because something I wrestle with a good bit is this idea of, well, okay, what would so and so say? Like if I went and just randomly quit my job and moved to the middle of nowhere and whatever it is, what would so and so say? And I like that he brings this idea of like you can't do that. I mean, I tell my kids this all the time. Like you can't overvalue what other people are going to say or what other people are going to think. If you know it's the right thing to do, you should do that thing, right? Like if you've talked to your trusted sources and you know it's the right thing to do, or you've processed it and worked through it, you gotta go with that. So I like that he starts that here. Like he starts that process of essentially countering what other people think and really going internal and thinking about like what matters to me, kind of a thing. Like I really like that he starts to stress that here.
Yeah, you got to decide for yourself.
Yeah. All right. So now this ties into something at the very, very end of the book that I want to start like touching on as we go through these chapters. So there's a call to action section at the end of the book where he basically takes each of these chapters, and Mike and I, we talked about it a little bit before the show. We think that it's basically his one sentence summary or his few word summary of each of the chapters. So for chapter 1, which was titled Embrace the Unknown, he's really talking about your interests, and he's really talking about resisting that idea of the normal default path of success and really tying that back into what interests you, what are you passionate about, what is the thing that is different than the normal or different than the default that keeps you engaged. In the second chapter, follow your energy, he doesn't get to it till the end of the chapter, but he makes the statement, once I stopped trying to be successful in other people's eyes, I was able to slow down, pay attention, and notice the things I did naturally. So in this situation, his call to action is slow down to move forward. So if I'm going to move forward for myself, I need to slow down. I need to stop thinking about what everybody else thinks success is. I need to stop caring about what everybody thinks success is. And I need to think about what I think about success to be. So I think these call to actions are really interesting in the way that they like summarize or make his key points more concise. All right, so let's move to the third one. Commit to the journey. So in this third one, he's really talking about the fact that he takes this, kind of treats it about kind of like a sabbatical, if you will, which Mike, I love the fact that you've talked about sabbaticals, in your retreats and these kind of breakaways, quite a bit. But he uses those to get clarity. He uses those to figure out what the good work is and to constantly review and to constantly think about what that good work is. And in order for you to really zone in on what am I going to commit my time to, what am I going to really double down on, if you will. Right. So he makes a statement in here. I was terrified to admit that I did not fit into this world I'd worked so hard to enter. And I was scared to find my own way out, which I love that because it's so raw and so honest about I worked so hard to get here. I've gotten here. I'm so successful. And now I have to convince myself, hey, this isn't it. Right. And I have to be okay with the fact that I've just committed 20 something years of my life to get to this point. And it's not it. And that's a really, really hard thing for anybody to do, right? I think that's a really, really difficult thing for people to kind of make that hard pivot of, yeah, I'm going to, sunk cost fallacy. I think about sunk cost fallacy. It's oh, I'm just going to stay in this thing. Why? Well, because I just spent the last 20 something years of my life preparing for it and getting here and getting to the point where I can reap the benefits of this, and then going, whoa, nope, that's not it. And I gotta pivot and turn hard. So commit to the journey is chapter 3.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff in here. You mentioned the sabbaticals. One of the things that he does, it was kind of cool to hear about this because I've heard about it other places. But every 7th week he takes off, the 7th week sabbatical idea. I love that. Now that Life HQ is out the door, I'm going to try to do this. I actually have these on my calendar. It's just that I have blown right through them over the last several months because I need to get to the point where the business is sustainable. And you could make an argument that actually slowed me down because you mentioned it in chapter 2, slow down and move forward. But just didn't feel like it was something that I could do. I really like that idea though. The other thing mentioned, you have to fully commit. Having gone through the transition, and I'm going to keep bringing this up because I think this would have been helpful for me to hear from somebody that I looked up to when I was going through it. So if someone else is in that situation, you know, this is me telling you that you've got this, I guess. You do have to fully commit. The longer that you are trying to go between a couple of different things, the longer it's going to take to figure out if this is really going to work. I feel like I could have shortened the amount of time I spent in the messy middle if I had fully committed earlier. Now, that being said, I also don't think that you should just quit your job and figure it out. I think you should dabble on the side, and then when you've got an inkling that this is the direction that you want to go, you know, prepare ahead of time so you've got a runway and then make the leap. You know, there's a balance between all of this stuff, but I do think that you have to commit to the journey if it's really going to work. Now, one of the things he calls in this chapter is that most of us have been in steady motion since childhood, and this I thought was really interesting because that's the whole idea of the sabbatical, is that you really have to wrestle with who are you without the work. When you're not working, what do you do? Who are you? And this is just kind of ingrained in our culture. You go to a fancy dinner party, you meet somebody new. Well, what do you do? Like, that's the first question you ask. So you have to figure out this sort of stuff for your own. And one of the things he mentions at the beginning of this chapter that I really liked is once you leave home, the old maps no longer work. So you got to figure out how to build your own maps, kind of alluding back to the map is not the territory, the mental model idea. But don't be scared of figuring that stuff out for yourself. The longer you put that off, the longer you're following somebody else's map, the longer, you know, you're not really potentially you're not on the true path. And I think at least getting clarity on that is super important.
He ties back into the chapter 2 call to action, you know, where he talks about the fact that good work, in order to find it, you really have to slow down. You have to experiment. You have to reflect. You have to do this really, I would say it's an intense process, right? That a lot of people avoid, where it's this slowing down and introspection type of a thing. Now, what I also think is interesting is in his call to action for what I think is associated with this one, it's appreciate the non-monetary benefits of good work. So if you think about slowing down, if you think about taking a sabbatical, what's the primary thing you're giving up? You're primarily giving up immediate monetary gains, right? So, okay, if I take a sabbatical, I'm probably not going to make money during that period of time, or I'm going to make money differently than the guaranteed steady income that I was making. So this makes me think of one of my buddies. He's an author, and he's doing it for a couple different reasons, but he is taking his family on like an RV tour, a grand tour of the whole United States. And as he's doing it, he's tying it into speaking gigs at local schools and at different events. And part of it, I think, he's never told me this, but part of it, I think he's doing it as like a promo gig, but he's also doing it because that's part of his good work, right? Like, yes, being an author is part of the good work, but also speaking and helping other people, you know, think about being authors is part of his good work. And I really like that idea of like, he's taking the sabbatical from the day job, but he's not doing anything. Like, he's not like, you know, I think about a sabbatical and I think, oh, we're just going to go and we're going to sit around and we're going to do nothing. But that isn't necessarily what a sabbatical is. A sabbatical is, in my mind, it's a difference from what the normal would be. You know, it's like we're intentionally going to be different in more introspective, more experimentation sense. So I like this good idea. Mike, anything else to wrap up on chapter 3?
Nope.
All right, so let's move into chapter 4. So have faith in good work is the title for chapter 4. In this situation, he's kind of, you know, doubling down on the fact that like what he really wants you to do is he wants you to get the idea that it's personal. He wants you to get the idea that like once you find this good work, that once you experience the joy within this good work, you know, you can protect it and you can have faith that that's going to continue to provide you that energy. It's going to continue to provide you this feeling of this is the thing you should be doing and this is the thing you should be doing. And then this is where, or at least at some point here up until now, he's also tied into his wife's story, right? So he meets his wife and like her story of trying to find good work. So now we have two different stories. We have his story of trying to find good work and we have her story of trying to find good work. And we're kind of run those throughout the rest of the book. Basically, this overall searching and finding for, this whatever this good work meant for them. And this is where I kind of had a little bit of trouble with the book, because I was like, we still haven't defined good work. We still haven't thought about like what this good work is. So I kind of struggled in chapter 4 to be like, I need to know what good work is. That way I can have faith in it.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. I think he talks, all the way back in the introduction about how good work can reshape what you desire. Good work doesn't happen on a factory schedule, has a natural seasonality. So he's kind of dropping hints of it. But I think it's okay not to really define it just yet, because I do think good work is one of those things that you have to discover for yourself. It's going to be different for every person. He mentions in this section that once you've experienced the joy of good work, not experiencing it makes you take it more seriously. And I think I can resonate with that. It's sort of like Life HQ is my good work. And so the thought of not being able to work on that anymore at this point is appalling to me. If you would have said 6 weeks ago, I'd be like, yeah, good, I'm done anyways. But I don't know. It's sort of like you know it when you see it. But the other thing that I thought was interesting in this section is the importance of writing. I talk about this in the creativity flywheel framework, where I mentioned that the big problem people have with personal knowledge management, in my opinion, is they have a whole bunch of input, but they never have an output. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a blog or you have to be recording a podcast, YouTube. You can, like, that is an output, but there needs to be some sort of output, because that is the process in which you synthesize the ideas and you make them your own. So he mentions that writing is his good work kind of throughout this whole first part. But then in this chapter, talks about writing is what helped his wife, Angie, to see herself write. And she actually went through Rite of Passage, which I'm going through right now, which
I thought that was cool.
Yeah, kind of interesting. And I guess if there's a common thread here, that would be the thing that I would call out is don't underestimate the value of the writing process in terms of figuring this stuff out for yourself.
All right, so we get into part 2 now. So part 1 was awaken to good work. Part 2 is going to be rewrite your work story. All right, so the first chapter in rewrite your work story is find this positive edge. And he says in here, I relied on a formula: follow the successful path, get good grades, do what seems impressive, right? And that's his old path, right? So he relied on that formula, and then he ties that into the fact that he created this trap for himself. So, I was following this formula, this get good grades, do what seems impressive, all of those things, essentially with this others focused on where I am. And then he said, I was playing this never-ending game, right? That I couldn't move forward because I constantly had to do this thing that everybody else would think highly of me, for that. Right? And then he refers to it as basically being anesthetized, right? Like, so I'm numb to this idea, and I'm really, you always talk about the creative flywheel, right? The creativity flywheel. Well, I think this is another kind of a flywheel, right? It's like you're on this thing, and I think the other word that we would always think about this one is I'm on this treadmill. I have to keep running on this treadmill because I've created this scenario for myself where I have to keep running on this treadmill, right? And then he gets into this Robert Frost quote, "The best way out is through," right? And he gets this idea of like, okay, well, let's shed that former identity and let's go with this idea of, here's a quote from him. The only true and worthwhile edge is deeply caring about what you do. So this is where he talks about find the positive edge. So this thing that is deeply associated with you and the thing you care about the most. I need to do the thing I care about the most. For him, it was writing. Right. And he's talked about this a lot up until this point. So we're in chapter 5 now. He's talked about how writing is that thing. When he wakes up in the morning, that's what he wants to do. And this is where I will probably identify my first action item of the book. Right. So as we get to action items later, but it's like one of my first action items is, what is that thing that I care so deeply about that I have to do it? If I'm not doing it, I don't feel like I'm on this edge, right? This positive edge of what he talks about. So I'll tell you mine, right? What I think mine is, but I want to reflect on this more, right? Teaching, educating, helping people learn different things. Like, I think that is the thing that I care more about in anything that I do. Right? It's like I want to educate, I want to teach, I want to help people get better than they were the day before in some specific context. Mike, what about you? Like, I'm going to turn it to you as a question, right? Then you can unpack whatever else you want to unpack from chapter 5. I know you have your life theme. I'm guessing it's going to be tied to your life theme, but what's your positive edge that you care so deeply about you have to do it?
Well, that is the life theme, which my life theme is I help people multiply their time and talent, leave a bigger dent in the universe. If I can do that, I'm happy. And I use the life theme as a filter, so everything that I do has to connect, or at least I have to think that it will connect. There's a good chance that it will connect if I'm going to do it. And sometimes I think it's going to connect and it doesn't turn out quite that way. That's kind of what the digital marketing agency job was. I saw a scenario where that allowed me to live out my life theme in different exciting ways, but it didn't work out exactly the way that I thought. And that's fine. So then try to find something else. I don't have a specific thing like the living out that life theme, helping people multiply their time and talent, leave a bigger dent in the universe looks exactly this way, because I've discovered that the way that manifests changes over time. So I think that's a good enough direction for me at the moment. Yeah. That's my true north. In this chapter, though, this is where I think, sort of related to this, you get hints of or clues as to how he really thinks about passion, because he talks about find something that is worth fighting for. He explicitly says the journey might suck, but it might also be worth it.
Yep.
That is passion right there,
yeah.
According to the definition that I shared earlier. But the other thing that really just kind of, I got to chew on this a little bit more. He says, make decisions with your emotions, understanding they will always be with you on your journey. And I feel like for somebody who is maybe considering making the leap, but it seems scary, you kind of don't want to think about the scary stuff. But if you just got to the point where I'm always going to have a little bit of fear, and just learning to deal with that and make decisions in spite of feeling that, I feel like that could be very transformational for people. Not using your emotions as a signal that this is the wrong path, but it's like one data point. You know, it's not that it's good or bad. You can ascribe the meaning to it that you want, but recognizing that it's never going to go away. If you make a decision because you don't want to feel fear, it's going to manifest in a different form somewhere else. So I don't know. I think there's a whole lot to unpack in that. And I don't even know exactly what I want to do with that yet. But I think it's important to learn how to work through that stuff, as opposed to just shove it under the carpet and maybe it'll go away once I get to the other side.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to chapter 6, because he starts out part 2 with a Steve Jobs quote that, kind of gets into this, and then he kind of unpacks it here in this chapter 6. Chapter 6 is don't mistake a good job for good work. I personally really resonated with this chapter in terms of, I think we do that too often, right? There is like the work that I do, and then there's the job that I have. And I think we often will conflate these two things to say either one, they need to be the same thing, right? That like the good work that I do must be the job that I have, right? Or we try to say like, well, the job that I have is the good work that I do. And it's like, hold on, like, no, they don't have to be. And that like, those things can be completely separate from each other. So this was a thing that was like, there were new parts to it. And then there was also like kind of reaffirming different things for me. So he makes a quote in here that the life built around good work requires you to be brutally honest about what you truly want and what is actually possible, right? So I really like that quote. It's like, okay, I need to be brutally honest about like, what do I truly want? Like, do I truly want this? Do I truly want this? Do I truly want this? And then whatever those answers are, that will lead us to thinking about our good work and lead us to thinking about how we get to good work.
Well, that specifically, I mentioned before we hit record that I was listening to a podcast by Jay Klaus where he interviewed Chase Jarvis on his new book. And one of the takeaways for me from that podcast episode was, number one, Chase Jarvis really is leaning into the whole idea of mindfulness meditation. He's done all of the research, and basically everybody who's successful, they credit some sort of mindfulness practice So that's kind of like a common denominator, and it's really got me thinking about what that means for me. But then he and Jay started nerding out a little bit about specifically what does that look like, and they both were talking about the importance of this question: what do I really want?
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I don't really think about.
Yeah.
So I want to think about that more. And I don't have an action item necessarily associated with this yet, but it's interesting because I had written down that same quote that you just mentioned from this chapter, and I think identifying what you really want out of your life and work is maybe something that you just kind of gloss over for a while. Especially once you make the decision, once you get out of college, this is just the path that I've chosen. I'm going to continue to walk down this path and never
Yep.
really think about the alternatives. But interesting.
Yeah, he quickly after that, starts talking about the fact that there's this idea of skill market fit, and then there's the idea of person interest fit. And I thought this was a really good distinction. He makes a statement here. What are the activities you absolutely must do? What do you truly care about? And what I think is really interesting here, and as it ties to skill market fit and person interest fit, is like, okay, the things that might get me paid easily, readily, that's a skill interest fit. There's somebody has an interest in the skills that I have. They're willing to pay me a certain amount of money to do those skills or accomplish that thing. I personally may not be that interested in those things, right? Like I may be like, oh yeah, that's fine, like whatever. But somebody's willing to pay me for it, so therefore that's my job. That's how I make money. Then there's the okay, like this is the thing that I like need to do. This is the thing that I wake up in the morning and I'm like, if I don't do this thing, there is a gigantic activity size hole in my life, right? Like that I missed out on the opportunity to do that thing. I think this is a really interesting thing that often gets smushed together and conflated with each other of like, oh, well, the interest I have must be the thing that somebody pays me money for. No, I don't think that's true at all. I think it can be true, but I don't think it has to be true. So he then makes it say, I decoupled the idea of work from the idea of job. And I think that is like the summary statement of this thing. Decouple the idea of work from job. If they overlap, cool. If they don't, that's okay. And he wants us to go to work, and in particular good work, and stop thinking about job.
Yep.
So that's kind of my summary for chapter 6. But go ahead, Mike.
I mean, that's the main idea. I do think he also says life cannot be partitioned into neat little boxes, which is at the heart of my issue with the term work-life balance. There is no work in life. It's just your life. You have to figure out how to make it all work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But he also says, this is an important question, I think, what's lighting a fire in your soul? And you should look for ways to do more of that, if at all possible.
Yep. Okay, so let's go to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is question your work script. So he said, good work is my attempt to reclaim the word work. It's something that makes us feel good. Now, there are a lot of times, Mike, in this book where I feel like, I don't know if this is the wrong way to say this, so correct me if you think this is the wrong way to say this. He gets kind of hippy-dippy sometimes, right? And I'm okay
That's
with
fair.
it. I'm okay with it, but it's like there are times when I go, it's just too it's too fluffy, it's too hippy-dippy, it's too, it's not tangible enough for me. And again, this is probably a problem with me, but like I think in this chapter, he does that. It's like he gets into this idea of ambitious, and he's, stop doing the busy work and start doing the ambitious thing. And I like the way he, kind of refines the word ambitious. And I can't remember if he does it in chapter 7 or if he does it in part 3 and some of the next chapters. But he reframes this idea of ambition, where ambition is not like kind of the challenging thing for work, but it's that thing that challenges me. It helps me connect to that thing that lights my soul. Like that is truly the true ambitious thing to do. So he ends this chapter with like, what's the most ambitious path for you? But he has redefined the ambitious, the word ambitious for us in the situation. So I don't know if I got a lot out of chapter 7. Hopefully you got more out of chapter 7 than I did, but like I didn't get a clear takeaway here.
Sure. Well, I think the big takeaway is to question the work scripts. So basically, how does work get done. And the question he asked at the beginning, what are the stories and scripts you've believed about work? That was interesting to me because I have believed many different stories and scripts about work, and he hits on a bunch of them. So there's the traditional 9 to 5. I'm going to an office. And I think maybe everybody listening to this, at least at this point, post-COVID, recognizes that you don't actually have to be in an office to get work done. So we've rethought that maybe even a little bit. But then he talks about being on the beach. This is interesting because I've totally done this. Being on the beach. And he describes this as, I've got this project for this person and they're paying me good money. And most of the time I'm just sitting around. I can do whatever I want. I can be wherever I want. Doesn't that sound great? And he says, being on the beach sounds great until you realize that when you're working on that client project, it supersedes everything else. I have been here. I remember specifically when I first started working for Asian Efficiency, I was writing an article on the pontoon boat at the lake. Like my family was on vacation. I was sort of on vacation. I was not officially on vacation, but I was getting my work done. I remember posting a picture on Instagram. Like, this is great. I can get my work done while sitting on this boat. And I'm living the life, right? This is amazing. I'm the entrepreneur guy on the beach, except I wasn't an entrepreneur and I was working for somebody else. And then reality hit at some point where it's like, hey, you need to fix this. And I had to drop everything that I was doing. It didn't matter that I was on a pontoon boat at the lake. And that wasn't the moment that realization came. That was just the moment that I realized I had bought into that script. That's the movie that played back in my mind as I was reading through this. That was my version of On the Beach. And then I realized, when they decided that this thing needed to be done right now, I needed to be available. I needed to be on call. And I realized, not in that moment, but now I can look back and realize being on call is the thing that I resent the most. I don't care about scheduling a meeting. Like, I will give you my time, but I do not like the fact that someone can take it from me at their whim. That's where I'm drawing the line. And so I had a pretty, I'm getting emotional and kind of worked up about it as I'm talking about it here. But I had that same sort of reaction when I was reading the book. It's like, that's the thing that just drives me nuts. So when he's talking about redefining ambition, it doesn't have to be facing outward. You can have ambition in terms of things internally. That made sense to me. And again, maybe because I've kind of worked through that a little bit, but I think this is if there was an action item associated with this about, you need to think different about the way work gets done. I think that's a really positive action item. Even if you don't do anything with it, just considering the options of what's possible.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. All right, so we're working into part 3 now. So if part 1 was awaken to good work, part 2 was rewrite your work story. Part 3 is embrace the challenges. Chapter 8 launches us out into that with solve the puzzle of good work. Like Mike and I talked about before, this is where he breaks into the definitions now. He formalizes the definitions of what good work is, what good enough work is, what supporting activities, and what bad work is. So just to recap real quick, good work is activities that give you energy and fuel your journey. Good enough work are basically you enjoy these tasks, they pay the bills, but they're not considered good work. Supporting activities are complementary to good work. They're sometimes a distraction. So this would be like submitting an invoice for the good work that you do. Like, it's a supplementary activity. It's not any of the other categories. And then bad work is basically stuff you should avoid. It drains your energy. It's sometimes necessary, but really only in those rare instances you want to avoid bad work. I like here what he says, and this is something I've struggled with and had trouble with in the past, that rushing to monetize good work can be a mistake. That like you need to essentially, it gets back to his idea of slow this down, really be introspective here before you take what you think is your good work. So in his situation is writing, and he's going to constantly refer back to his writing process, that if you rush into this monetization, you may not be protecting your good work well enough, which I really like that idea of there is a time to monetize. There is a time to think about the good work that I'm doing. Does it even lend to monetization? But don't do it too fast. And I think that's an old work script bleeding into his new idea of good work where, the work that I do should always make money. Hold on. No, it shouldn't. is it great if it does? Yes, but like we need to think about this a little bit differently.
Yeah, there's trade-offs with everything, which is why I like the framing of this as a puzzle. And then he also says later on that the puzzle of good work will never be solved. So really you're just taking your best guess at this, and you are optimizing things in a specific way, which he didn't say this specifically, but this is something that I had picked up, I don't even know how long ago, but it's one of the filtering questions that I always ask is, what am I optimizing for? And I feel like you can apply that in any situation and you can come up with an answer, and it's not right or wrong, but just recognizing I am optimizing for this thing right now. And then you give yourself permission to optimize for something else differently. He does say in this chapter, optimize your energy, not your time. I think that that is a different way of thinking about how you get work done, which is important. I don't think it's the only way to think about it. But the other thing really that I liked from this is the phrase, you are the conductor of your life. So you get to figure out how all these pieces fit together. And ideally, they're all in service of one unifying thing. I grew up playing violin, so I played in orchestras. And there's a conductor who's trying to get all the instruments on the same page so that they can produce something that sounds pleasing to the audience, right? That's really what you're trying to do with all of the different resources that are available to you. He does give 3 filtering questions in this section, which I thought are really good. So I'll just share those quickly. Looking back, what chunks of time feel satisfying and seem to be more important as time progresses? What am I drawn to right now? This is the second question. What am I drawn to right now? What am I doing already that feels good? And then the third filtering question, at the end of my life, what will I definitely not regret having done? Which is a little bit different way of thinking about things. I like that. At the end of my life, what will I definitely not regret having done? Because I think the flip side of that is something I've thought about before. What will I regret not having done? So the one word difference there, but totally different meaning. And I even mentioned that earlier when I made the decision to quit the digital marketing agency job. I recognized if I got to the end of my life, I had not done this, I would regret it forever. So he's taking a positive spin on that. You know, what are the things that you're doing right now that you absolutely at the end of your life, you're going to feel good about having done those things? I think that's kind of interesting. And again, there's no right answer to any of this stuff. You have to figure it out for yourself. But asking these kinds of questions can help you move in the right direction for the way you want to optimize right now.
Perfect. So that was the last thing I wanted to get to is the idea of those 3 questions. I really like those 3 questions. We move into chapter 9. Chapter 9 is called Do What Feels Right. I didn't capture a lot of stuff out of here, so if you have more, make sure you throw those out there. But basically, it's this idea of we want to stay connected to the good work that we're doing. So based on feeling, based on energy, we want to stay connected to that and committed to that good work. He doubles down, maybe triples down. I don't know how many times we've brought up the same idea, but that sometimes slowing down and doing nothing or, really pumping the brakes on that is what we need to do in order to, move forward, right? So he actually makes the statement, the most productive thing is to do nothing at all, right? And I think the old work script would say like, no. Like I constantly have to be working. Like I constantly have to be making progress. And it's like, well, hold on. Maybe you need to take that sabbatical. Maybe you need to break down. So he ties in these old concepts. And what I like about the way Paul writes is like, he doesn't heavy hand it. Like he doesn't overdo it. But at the same time, when you start to look back over this, you see these threads come through. He then continues, like, I think one of the ways that you might get annoyed by this book is his constant example of writing. Right, because if you don't resonate with writing, then you might not be able to resonate as much with his good work and the way he frames good work. But he really is like, writing is my good work. I'm going to focus and prioritize writing at all cost. That's what feels right to me. So, Mike, I don't know if you had anything else for chapter 9.
Yeah, well, a couple things, but first I want to double click on that. So I agree with you that if you don't identify writing as your good work or an important aspect of your good work, that maybe some of this gets lost. But I kind of think maybe this is a bigger deal to a larger audience than I initially thought. So I think it's taken me a while to recognize that, yeah, writing is the fundamental skill for a lot of the things that I do online. I don't consider myself primarily a writer, But I think over the last several months, I'm leaning more that way. Prior to that, I would have said I'm a YouTuber, I'm a podcaster, I make video courses, stuff like that. And writing is a part of that, but it's not the primary thing. However, you look at like Rite of Passage we mentioned already. There's Ship 30 for 30. There are so many cohorts out there that are geared to get people to write online. I think maybe this is a bigger deal than I realized at the beginning. So I don't know if you find yourself in that scenario where, well, I'm just not a writer, maybe dig a little bit deeper and see if really you are.
Yeah.
The other thing, which I thought was awesome in this section, he tells the story of actually turning down a $200,000 book deal. Yep. After The Pathless Path had blown up, Ali Abdaal's talking about it. Penguin House, I think, was the publisher.
I think
came
so.
to him and said, we want to redo or republish Pathless Path under our umbrella, and we want you to write this second book. And a $200,000. The way I read this, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It was a 2-book deal for with a $200,000 advance.
But one of the books was republishing The Pathless Path.
Okay.
So it was really like that one plus one additional one, and they were going to be under Penguin Random House. Yeah. And the way I read this was that was a $200,000 advance. Now I know people who have gotten book deals. Chris Bailey is a friend of mine. I know a couple other people who I won't share their names just yet because I don't think it's public that their books are being published. But I've seen them go through the whole process of getting an agent and writing the pitch and securing the deal. And I can tell you $200,000 is a pretty big advance.
That's what I thought too.
They have to really believe that you're going to just crush it in order to front you that much, because the way it works is they give you that money up front, and then basically you have to pay back that advance. It's called earning out. Once the book has sold enough copies that you have paid back the advance, then you start earning the royalties on top of that. It's how the traditional book publishing route works. So that's not a small thing that they are willing to advance you $200,000. And he's in Taiwan, he's in Bali. His cost of living, he shares some specific numbers, is pretty low. Mm-hmm. That could feed your family for a very long time. So that seems like a very good deal. And I have so much respect for him saying, no, I am going to do it my way, and I'm going to tell the stories I want to tell.
Yep.
And I'm going to self-publish this thing. I mean, I think self-publishing doesn't take quite as much guts as it did a while back, because it's easier to get your material in front of your target audience with the tools that are available to us. Internet changed a bunch of that. And I honestly have been thinking about, because I actually want to write a book on the whole like PKM stack framework. Do I want to get a book deal or do I want to self-publish? And I've been leaning more towards the self-publish route recently, just because I kind of don't want to do all the work and try to pitch people on the saleability of this idea. I just want to write about it and see if it resonates with people, which is exactly what Paul Miller did.
Yep.
But then to double down on that, essentially, with this second book, instead of taking the book deal and instead of going the traditional route, I feel like that just adds so much more credibility to his message. And I'm glad that he included that story.
Yeah. I don't think I could have done that. Like, I really don't think, I mean, that's just a huge sum of money to do the thing that you're liking to do. Like, I was blown away by that.
Yep.
All right. So chapter 10 goes into find the zeal. I'm going to soapbox here on an aspect of chapter 10. So Jensen Huang, who is the founder of NVIDIA, he puts a quote in here, and he's referring to his employees. He said, "It is so vital that we create conditions where they can do their life's work and they're not making sacrifices to be here. What you're doing at the time and not the outcome." So he said, focusing on what you're doing and not the outcome. The outcome is the result of amazing people doing their life's work, working together to do something the world's never. Okay. I know that was a big long quote. I could not agree with this more. And I think this is where I get so frustrated with the standard working world. The standard working world brings really good, really smart people in and then forces them to do certain things it's not their life's work. It's not what they're passionate about. It's like, we're going to smush you into this box and make you do this thing. When really, if we brought a bunch of people in and we gave them a good mission and we said, okay, as long as you're doing stuff that advances this mission, go, be creative, make progress, like do these things. And then every so often we check and we just make sure you're doing things that advance this mission, but we don't micromanage and I could not, and this is where the idea of zeal comes in, right? Like we want to work with this idea of where we're doing the thing that is like the important thing for our life. I could not agree with this more. I think if every organization, if every company, if every individual was able to find this, I think we'd make significantly more progress in a bunch of different areas, and the productivity would just go through the roof. But instead, we implement all this bureaucracy and we micromanage people, and it's like, then they get burnout and then they just like they wilt like a flower and they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to quit and go do something else. And it drives me insane. Soapbox ended. Mike, take over.
That's good. Yeah. A couple things that stood out to me from this chapter. The first thing is the idea of busyness and sloth, where he actually says busyness can be defined as sloth, which is the opposite of enthusiasm. I thought that was really interesting. And then goes a step further. The opposite of sloth is deep and active engagement with our work. Now, there's a whole big tangent here as to why people are not engaged with their work. And that's one of the fascinating things about business organization and culture that was really the itch that I wanted to scratch in my role as the integrator previously, because I love that. That's the connection I saw with the life theme, helping people multiply their time and talent and leave a bigger dent in the universe. If you could create an awesome company culture where people really just buy in and they're thriving in their work, that's a cool way that you could do that. Turns out agency world life is just not for me, which someone who knows me well could have, looked at that and be like, well, I would have told you that. That's fine. I had to find it out on my own.
Yep.
But I like this idea of figuring out what it is that really charges your batteries, makes you come alive. That moments of impact is what we call it in the life theme. And then trying to figure out a way to do more of that in your day-to-day work, I think is a really important concept. One of the things I liked here in the end of this chapter, when you're disconnected from the work that you do, it's a constant struggle. And I think that is true. You should be paying attention to the things that you tend to procrastinate on, because if you look at why you tend to procrastinate on those things, you may discover, I just really hate this thing. Maybe it's something hard and it's, the good enough work, the admin stuff that you have to do that accompanies the stuff that really does make you come alive, in which case that's fine. But if it's constantly stuff that you're like, why do I have to do this? Maybe you got to dig a little bit deeper then.
Yeah. I like that point at the end. Instead of thinking what you should be doing, notice what you're already doing. Why not do more of that? So it's exactly to the point you're making, Mike. Chapter 11. So now we get into see your work as it is. He breaks down the two selves. He said self one is the teller. Self two is the doer. He then quickly moves to this idea that the doer is that intuitive nature, that intuitive self that guides us towards what matters. The teller is basically, we should do this. We should do this, right? So that teller is constantly using the word should. The doer is constantly like, what do I intuitively think matters, and how am I going to work in that? So I really like his breakdown of that. I also really like this. He makes a quote from a person named Taggart. There are two basic ways to solve a problem: get rid of it or give it an upgrade. And he said these are wrong, right? So the one half of this is more wrong than the other one. The give it an upgrade one, in terms of he was constantly seduced by this idea in his 20s that I could give my job an upgrade. I could give my job an upgrade. And as I gave my job these upgrades, it would get better and it would get better. And what he realized is that wasn't the right approach for him. He actually needed to get rid of that traditional working life, and he needed to move more towards this idea of what is my good work, and I need to be putting more of my time into that good work that gives me energy, that I have this zeal over. So what I like is that he's trying to help you clarify in this chapter. He's trying to help you say, like, okay, what are these things where you're constantly saying, like, I'm telling myself I should be doing this, but really internally I'm saying these other things. The doer in me is saying these other things. And then how do I keep lying to myself and saying, I'm going to give this an upgrade. I'm going to be able to fix this. I'm going to be able to fix this, when really, are you able to actually fix it? So I resonated a lot with this chapter in those two ideas.
Interesting. Most of the notes that I got from this particular chapter were around the inner game. And he talks about the two different selves. You touched on this, the teller and the doer. But the place that this originally comes from is another book called The Inner Game of Tennis. Have you ever heard of that book? I'm assuming
Never.
You haven't read it yet.
Nope, never.
Okay. So I grew up playing tennis. I played college tennis, D3, so not like super great at it or anything, but tennis was a big deal to me. And this was a book that was handed to me probably in high school.
How about that?
And yeah, so it's interesting. The reason that it's called the inner game of tennis is that tennis is a very mental game. And there's two different ways to play tennis, I guess, singles or doubles. I always preferred singles because you're in complete control of the entire point. You're not relying on somebody else. But then also, tennis is a very mental game. And often the difference between winning and losing is not your skill level. It's what's going on between your ears.
Okay.
You double fault on a big point, and then you just got to keep going. So you have to figure out how to work through that and not double fault again. And I think that my dad specifically, and probably some of my coaches when I was in high school, were frustrated with my inner game of tennis because I would beat myself up.
Okay.
And I would just focus on the mistakes that I had made, and then it would sort of snowball. Skill-wise, like in practice, I could hit all of the shots, but then when I got into the games, I would choke sometimes. Not all the time, but I remember specifically when I was in high school, I was state ranked, so I would go around and play these different tournaments, and there was this one kid who I would always see at these tournaments who I could never beat. It wasn't because he was better than me. It was because I just had in my head that I could not beat him. And every single time I'd run into him in one of the draws. And then on the way home, my dad's telling me, what's the deal? Like, you could totally beat that guy. I don't know. So I resonate with the whole inner game that he's talking about here. But there's an aspect of this which is really interesting in that if you look for problems, you will find them. So that's what the inner game manifested for me as a lot of times is I would focus on the mistakes that I had made, and it would prevent me from playing to my full potential going forward, especially in the moment. You miss an easy shot and you're like, you idiot. And then you lose the game and you're like, oh, well, that was the turning point. And then, with tennis, you've got games and then sets, and then that's the match. So it's easy for that stuff to snowball. If you can't turn the page and move on, play the next point, you're sabotaging yourself. So really what he's talking about here, seeing your work for where it is, or for what it is, this resonates with me because if you look for the problems, you will find them. And if all you're doing is looking for the problems, that's what you get fixated on. You see the negative, and then I believe you end up attracting more of the negative. You've got to replace that with something positive. And when you don't think about it, that's when this is really insidious. So I like the fact that he's calling this out in chapter 11, because one of the things that he mentions at the very end of this chapter is that without an inner game, you end up playing the outer game. And this, I think, is the default path, where he defines the outer game as trying to bend the world to your will, which is a losing proposition from the very beginning. And I feel like if you were to look at the path that he's taken and really the success that he's had. And you could look at his life and be like, that sounds pretty cool. Like I would love to be able to do that. But the reason that he's able to do that is he's just decided this is what I want.
Yeah.
And then he's worked towards it. So it's not a zero-sum game. And because Paul did this, you can't do this. He's trying to encourage you to take this path and figure it out for yourself. But I feel like the default is kind of the scarcity mindset, where it's like, well, I got to get mine, because if I don't, somebody else is going to get it. And I think that's the wrong way to approach this.
Yeah, it's almost as if he's like, I'm going to live this way and I'll figure out all the other details. Like it's almost like the mentality he has going into it, which is a very different mentality than I've had most of life.
Yep, me too.
Okay, so part 1 was awaken to good work. Part 2, rewrite your work story. Part 3, embrace the challenges. We're rounding the bend here. We're making it into part 4 and the end of the book. Commit to good work. So 12 is all about money. So the chapter title is Leave Money on the Table. And I mean, essentially the nature of this is, we often go into this thinking about like money, 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 and my job needs to be about making it and making money and doing all these things. And you need to think about it differently. You need to think about good work differently. And there are other benefits to good work, right? Like that you need to find those other benefits to doing the good work. The one that, the aspect of this that really, really resonated with me is every time I hear the stories of entrepreneurs and then I hear the sacrifices they made to make it big, it's like, wow, like what a really interesting. And these aren't necessarily the stories of normal entrepreneurs, right? Like, so there are the stories of like the lifestyle entrepreneurs, right? The people who go out and they start the business and it's a lifestyle business. They're not going to be billionaires. They're not even going to be multimillionaires, right? Like they're really just, they wanted to go out and start a thing and there was a need there and they did it. It's not those stories as much. It's the ones that like are often, glamorized and told, and oh, so-and-so started this big unicorn company and they made billions of dollars. And then you find out like, well, their life was in shambles and, they didn't like anything about what they were doing and, all this stuff. I should have, I could have, I would have kind of a situation. That really, really resonated with me. So this idea of, embrace the life path, not the money path, and like look for the other benefits of doing good work. I resonate with all of that aspect. And then he kind of sealed the deal at the very end where he was like, and then there's all these stories about entrepreneurs who have these regrets and they wish they would have done these other things. So that's the gist of chapter 12.
Yeah, I like this chapter a lot. Couple things that stand out to me from this. Number one, he talks about how he had these savings and how as he's watching his savings go down, he was starting to freak out about it. And then someone says, well, why don't you just think of the savings as a gift from your former self? I thought that was interesting because I didn't have the savings when I made the leap. So we actually have accumulated a little bit of debt, which I hate. However, with the Life HQ launch, we're able to pay off some of that. And I realized that like that framing was just interesting to me. It's like, oh, well, my former self didn't give me that gift, but that doesn't matter. Like I can still make this work.
Yeah.
Which side note, I guess, with the Life HQ launch, and I've kind of used that as the catalyst for a different way of thinking about this book. I mentioned that at the beginning. There was actually a moment on launch day as I'm watching some of those orders come in, and I was super nervous. I didn't know what it was going to end up being, but I'm watching some of the orders come in. Rachel we do classical conversations with our kids. So they had a in-person day and I'm at home alone. I get out of the shower and I see the orders start to come in and I realize like at that moment, I'm going to be able to make it. It sounds kind of corny and stupid, but it was that specific moment in my bedroom. I tried to call Rachel. She was teaching, so she wasn't able to answer the phone. But I was like getting choked up and I just needed to tell her we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Not that she needed to hear it, but I needed to.
You needed to say it. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of like the tipping point for me with all of this. Now, having said that, the whole gist of this chapter is that you can't make life decisions based on a spreadsheet. I think I understand what that looks like now. Leaving money on the table, he mentions in this chapter, will make you feel like a fool, but it doesn't mean that you're not making money, which is an important distinction here. When he says leave money on the table, it's sort of like, well, you're walking away from this stuff. Not necessarily. There's trade-offs here for everything. So when he said leaving money on the table doesn't mean you're not making money. It actually might mean you're making more money later. That kind of changes the conversation about this. It's no longer, well, I'm not going to make money because I'm going to optimize for something else. Sort of not explicitly, but in the back of my mind, the question that comes up is, why not both?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that question is at least worth asking. Maybe you can't have both, whatever the situation is that you're trying to figure out. How do I choose between these different things? How do I optimize these different things? But I think it's at least worth asking and considering.
All right, good. So let's go to the final chapter of the book, chapter 13, Reclaim Your Ambition. And Mike, I know somewhere he defined the way he defined ambition, but I didn't capture it. Did you capture the way he defined ambition? Is it in chapter 13?
I don't have an exact definition, but back in chapter 7, he talks about how it doesn't have to be facing outward. So I don't have the exact definition written, but I think really, if I were to have to define it, it's more tied to we talk about passion a lot, and the thing that you're willing to suffer to see it come about. Like, what are you chasing that you're willing to pay a price for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the best thing I could grab from it is it's the fire that burns inside of you, which I think is very like.
I like that.
Yeah, it's like this big woo kind of idea, but like I like that you said it's not that external thing; it's more of that internal thing, which I like. I like a lot because I think he's culminating a point here. He's getting to the climax of a point here, with money and with basically the work scripts and these definitions that everybody is, projected onto you, and the shoulds, and you should be doing these kind of things. He's basically saying, hold on, you don't have to do that, right? Like, you need to do work that matters to you. You need to do work that provides you energy. You need to do work that you consider to be good work, that you get into a state of flow with, and that you can do this thing. And then also there's this other idea of this job and this making money and this, this gig work and good enough work. And I think he's just really putting a nice bow on the idea of essentially, I guess, if you will, telling people it's okay to do that stuff that that you drive, or that has that passion inside of you, or that has that fire that burns inside of you. It's okay to do that and pursue that moving forward. So it's really just his, tying a bow on the book chapter, I think.
Yeah. So also remember the world that he's coming from. He kind of alludes to it a little bit. I think he talks about it more in The Pathless Path, but he was going hard down the default path and was, in everybody's eyes, successful because he was hustling and killing it and yada, yada, yada. So that's kind of how he's anchoring the old definition of ambition is you're putting in 60-hour weeks, working the overtime, climbing the ladder, because once you get to a certain point, you've made it. And when you think about what it takes to buy into that vision and be willing to pay that big a price, that's really the same sort of motivation he wants you to have towards this new definition of good work. And I think that's really powerful. It's a really cool way to end it. And then the last thing I jotted down in my outline, don't ever let the flame go out, is a good reminder. I can be really excited about Life HQ because I just had this launch and it went well, but am I still going to be excited about it a year from now? I hope so. And the kind of call to action for me from all of this is how you are feeling about this and how important it is to you right now. Do what you can to maintain that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So he's got a couple different things after this. He's got a call to action, which we talked about a little bit before. I didn't tie back into those for every chapter just for the sake of time, but it'll kind of highlight. It's like
So actually, let me correct you real quick, because you said call to action, and I know what you're talking about, but actually the call to action, if I remember correctly, is just a paragraph. Yeah. So this is on page 179,
okay.
where it's just a short little thing that he's telling you to embark on the search for good work. It's the most ambitious thing you can do. Then there is the final reflections. That's the thing, which I wanted to point out something from this too. So self-publishing, pros and cons, I guess. He mentions at the very, what does yours say on page 181? In order to help you on your path to finding and committing to good work, I wanted to leave you with how many thoughts from this book? Does he say 10?
I'm looking. Give me a second.
Do you have the digital or the analog version?
Always digital. Like,
okay.
Why would you ever?
So I thought maybe you did. So maybe you can tell me if this has been fixed, but it says 10 thoughts from this book. And then he goes on to list 13 different things, as you mentioned earlier, one from each chapter.
Mine is 13. I wanted to leave you with 13 thoughts from this book. So yeah, his print, his sending in for the print edition didn't get changed. Yeah. So to wrap up, we have the call to action. We have the final reflection, which then he breaks down the 13. He has a quote book in here, which basically he gives you some of the ideas of quotes that inspired the work. And then he does an epilogue, which is basically, a fisherman and a guy like himself. Like you would have to think it's him, right? They have this dialogue between, what's good work, and and he influences this fisherman guy to embrace this idea of good work, and then move it on. So that kind of wraps up the whole book. That's the epilogue for the whole book. So at this point, Mike, unless you have anything else, we can move into action items.
No, let's do it.
Okay. So action items, I'll start. So I want to think about what's my positive edge. If it is teaching, why is it teaching, right? Like why do I think that is my positive edge, or what is my positive edge? And then the other one that I want to do is this idea of like, what is the thing I can't not do, right? Like what's that thing where I don't have to think about it. I'm naturally doing it. Like, what is that thing that I can't not do? So my two action items are 100% reflection this time. I don't actually need to produce anything, but they're reflection on like what and how does that influence me? Like, what is that thing I can't not do, and how does that influence me moving forward? So, Mike, what are your action items, if any?
Good question. I actually don't have any action items.
Okay.
I think the action item from this for me is to keep doing what I am doing.
Okay.
I think I have a long-term action item with the 7-week sabbaticals, but that's probably not happening until 2025.
Okay.
So I don't have anything specific that I want to take away from this book. However, if I were to just like kind of chart this out for where I'm at right now, the pathless path, that was one of the major things that changed my perspective and got me to make the decision to go out on my own. Good work. It's interesting that we're reading this right after the Life HQ launch. This is a big push to keep doing what I am doing. And I think a lot of the stuff that's in here, well, we're kind of getting to style and rating now. So I'll put a pin in that.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Okay, so let's go into style and rating then. My book, I'll do it first. I really like this book. I like the style that it was written in. I like the way he shared a lot of good examples from his personal story. I like the mix between, like I said, it's like a kind of like a memoir that has these core principles underneath it, and he's trying to teach you the core principles as he's telling you a story. I like the quotes that he pulls. I think they were relevant. I think they were connected very, very well. I thought it was organized really, really well. Overall, I don't have very many negatives. I think if I'm nitpicking, like the biggest negative I have is I wanted his definition of things sooner. So it's like I wanted it clearer and sooner, but I mean, I'm being really nitpicky at this point. Like that is not, because he gives you the definition, he just doesn't give it when I would specifically want it. So overall, my style and rating, I'm giving this book a 5. Like I would definitely recommend this book to other people, and I'm giving it to people as a recommended read.
Interesting. I honestly did not see a 5.0 coming from you on this one, but
Wait, like before the conversation or like after we've just talked about it? I'm curious.
um, probably before the
Okay.
conversation. But the thing I'm wrestling with is there's a whole bunch of personal story in here, and I think you kind of hit on this at the beginning, where it's a little bit hard to put yourself in his shoes. It's hard to relate sometimes to the guy who walked away from not the Wall Street job, but essentially,
Yeah.
and then moved across the world to be independent nomad. Like, even with me and what I've done, that seems like a bridge too far. Like, I don't want to do that.
Yep.
I have to get I have to put in a little bit more work to get to the essence of what he's saying and then figure out what that looks like for me. And I don't think that diminishes the quality of the book at all. But it was interesting to hear from, like, I guess just how easily you were able to translate that. Because if you look at what this book is on the tin and where you're at with your career, be like, well, this doesn't match.
Yeah.
So that was kind of in the back of my head, was how easily are people going to be able to generalize the concepts that are in here? So I got to be honest, I was thinking this one is going to be a little bit harder for people to apply than the Pathless Path. And I
Okay.
was ready to give it a 4. However,
However,
I think this is a great book that hits on some very important concepts that are very relevant in the world of work today. And I think that everybody should read this.
mhm.
I think that a lot of the things that he talks about with the inner game and putting the puzzle together, just he challenges a whole bunch of norms in the world of work that I was trying to think through, had he taken that $200,000 advance and done a book deal, what would have been different about this?
Yeah.
I don't think he would have been quite as pointed or said some things quite as strongly as he did if there was an editor that was kind of pushing on him to tamp it down so it would be more applicable to a broader audience. Your score is basically kind of challenged that assumption, like, well, this is applicable to a broader audience anyways. So I think I'll join you at the 5 stars. I think, yeah, again, like I don't think that there's a single person listening to Bookworm right now that I would say don't read this. I guess if you're retired and you're not doing quote unquote work anymore, but even then, I feel like the conversation and the concepts that he's talking about here, you could still apply this
I
to
agree.
the things that you choose to do, whether or not you're getting paid for them. So
Yep. I agree completely. All right, Mike. So we're going to go ahead and put Good Work on the shelf. Can you tell us what the next book we're going to read is?
yes, the next book is Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman, author of 4,000 Weeks, which I absolutely loved. Haven't started this book yet, but really looking forward to it. And after that,
Outstanding. So after that, we're going to do one Free Time, Lose the Busy Work, Love Your Business. So I'm looking forward to digging into the idea of getting rid of busy work. I like getting rid of busy work. So
doesn't everybody?
do you have any gap books?
I do. I mentioned the J. Klaus podcast episode with Chase Jarvis previously. So I have bought Never Play It Safe by Chase Jarvis, which, just looking at the bold text in the Amazon description, discover the bold path to your most authentic life. I mean, this sounds like a great follow-up to what we just read.
Yes, it does. My gap book, and hopefully I can get there. I'm hoping I can get there. Really hoping I can get there. It's called Just Do Something. So it's a book called Just Do Something, and it's by Kevin DeYoung. And I'm looking forward to it's kind of a faith book, so I'm looking forward to digging into this one. And basically, it's getting rid of that idea of like, oh, I have to do the right thing. It's like, no, just do something. And this one will help me guide students as they graduate from our program.
Nice.
So just do something by Kevin DeYoung.
Looks cool.
Alrighty. So that wraps up another one. If folks are interested in the Pro Show, reminder that we have Pro Show. It's got added content to it. In this one, we talked about basically if we were going to hit the reset button, where would we go and what would we do and why would we do that? But you also get access to the bootleg feed, which drops about 2 weeks before the normal drop of the show. There's a wallpaper there. It supports the show, just kind of helps us keep the lights on from a expenses standpoint, and we really appreciate everybody who's a member. In order to sign up for that, you can go to patreon.com/bookwormfm, $7 a month to help us out and to support the show.
And thank you to everybody who supports the show financially. Really do appreciate it. Thank you to you, whether you support the show or not, for listening. And if you're reading along with us, pick up Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.